playing, the candles are burning low.
Hello, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ashley. I also sometimes go by Ahava, that is my Hebrew name, and welcome to this channel. Ashley Faith. Don't ask me what I'm doing with my hands. TikTok has drastically changed any gestures that I do. What we are about to embark on is 8 days straight of videos called Vlognukkah. It's like Vlogmas, but it's for the Jews, and I am one of the Jews. So I thought that the first video in this series, because I'm going to do a lot more like sort of sit down videos, because last year I did a lot more like vlogs, and that was because I was at home with my parents. There wasn't a global pandemic going on, and there's a lot more things to actually vlog, whereas this time it would just be me vlogging literally in my flat. That would be boring. So I've planned out a series of 8 videos that are inspired by the theme of Jewishness or Hanukkah for you, and there's a lot of things to look forward to. A cooking video, educational video on anti-Semitism, a sneaky hidden stock materials episode review, because my normal episode review will be one of the days of Hanukkah, so I just thought I'd do the review anyway. So, and some other things, book reviews, the story of Hanukkah, book recommendations, lots of things coming up this week, so do stick around. These videos are mostly pre-filmed because last year I had a really hard time when it came to having to edit every single day. It was just hard. So all of these are going to be pre-filmed, so I don't think I'll be able to sort of like acknowledge any comments that you do make, but come along for the ride. It's going to be really good. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn a bit about Hanukkah, about Jewishness, about me, and I hope you stick around for some of my other content. But I'm very excited for Vlognukkah. I've literally been waiting for it since last Vlognukkah, and even if it doesn't get a lot of views, I think I'll be really proud of the series in general. 8 days worth of videos, that's a lot of videos. That's like 8 weeks worth of videos in a normal time. So yeah, this is what today's going to be, and today I'm talking about, as you can tell from the title, growing up in an interfaith family, because that is my experience, and I wanted to share some of the positives that I found from it, things I'm glad of, and things that I find as negatives and cons. And I'm not at all blaming my parents for this. It's just the cons of the situation, that, like, you know, every situation has pros and cons. And I will tell you about my parents. They are both 50 years old. They were born in 1970, and they met in the 90s at a summer camp in New York State, upstate New York, and they had a long distance relationship for, I want to say, 3 or 4 years. My dad is from the town that I grew up in the northwest of England. My mum is from a suburb of New York City called Muncie, and you may have heard of Muncie recently. Last year, last Hanukkah, there was actually a synagogue attack in Muncie, so you might have heard of the town from that, which is really bad. And so my mum moved over from Muncie, which had a Jewish community. She moved over because of my dad and a bunch of, you know, sort of logistical reasons. It was easier for my mum to move here than my dad to move over there, and that's how it was. And that situated me in a small town in the northwest of England where there isn't very many Jews, and I like to joke that now that I have left and now that my brother has left the family home, my mum is the only Jew in that town. Probably inaccurate, but there's definitely no Jewish community there. And so that posed a lot of different situations onto the way that I was brought up and the way that my brother was brought up, and how that sort of impacted us. And I think it's rather interesting to talk about, because a lot of people talk about different people's different experiences when they're in, you know, from a Muslim family or a Sikh family or whatever. But I don't hear very many people talking about interfaith experiences and growing up in an interfaith household. And I think it's really interesting, and I really like that I grew up in an interfaith household, because I'm getting into the pros now, and I'll tell you about the cons later. But for me, it just broadened my worldview exponentially from a very, very young age, because I was brought around as much of the Jewish customs and traditions that my mum could. I always grew up around them. As a kid, I didn't eat pork, all this sort of stuff, and I was surrounded by Jewish culture at home, and then I went into the world and nobody else was Jewish, and so I experienced that. And obviously my dad's side of the family isn't Jewish either, and so I had a rather interesting experience, an isolating experience, I think, being the only Jewish person in any sort of given situation that I was in. But it gave me the perspective to be able to, I think, question culture and understand that people do things differently, and that is okay, and that's cool, and that's interesting, and that's a good thing. And I saw that from a very young age, and if I ever have kids one day, which I do want to have, I think that's one thing that I will take. I'm also technically in an interfaith relationship, so that will also pass on through me and hopefully to my children a respect for other cultures and traditions that aren't necessarily the ones that you follow or that you practice. And I think it definitely helped me see the world in a way with that wasn't so narrow-minded. And because I experienced Hanukkah and Christmas and Passover and Easter, experiencing the different cultures and traditions at the same time, there's something to be said about learning through experience. And I have that experience of two different cultures and traditions, and it's really funny because I did brownies, which is like sort of like Girl Guides if you're from the US, in the UK, and it's always like based in the church. And so I think it was once a month at the Sunday service at the church that we had our sessions at, we would go, and like all of the other sort of like the Girl Guides and the Scouts, which are the boys, they all would gather, and we would have our flags of the sort of group that we were in, and we would like do a little parade down the aisle of the church. And I would sit in church once in every 4 Sundays, and our family became known as the Jews that came to church every 4 weeks. And it was just for me, I experienced a really broad childhood, and I'm really grateful for it because, as I said, it taught me to respect other cultures, because I knew that I had 2 cultures, and I say cultures like this, but 2 sort of like traditions. And yeah, so I think for that reason I'm glad that's how I was brought up. But there are some cons to that, and I think the biggest one for me personally is that I didn't have a Jewish community, and I still don't really have a Jewish community. I sort of gathered one myself, kind of, or inserted myself into one when I went to UCL, especially since I was in the Jewish department. But I never had a Jewish community, which is a starkly different experience to what my mum experienced and to what my cousins, my mum's sisters' children, experience. And it's very different, and I do, like, I can't miss it because I've never had it, but I really wish I had that experience, because interacting with Jewish people and Jewish people online, and it's just find it really sad that it feels like a very personal family thing to me, and it's not. There's a huge community of Jewish people in the world, and there's Jewish people in every continent of the world that have their own individual like cultures and practices, and I just never experienced a Jewish community. And it's a con of my upbringing, and it's like no fault of my parents, it's just the situation where we live, there is no Jewish community. And also because of that, there are no really resources to be Jewish, which meant that the holidays that we could partake in and the traditions that we could partake in that require a group or a community, we couldn't do it. So I didn't really go to synagogue when I was younger. I think the only times I remember going to synagogue is one of the times it was in America when I was at my grandma's house, and the other time I think it was Purim, and that was it. So yeah, it's a very different experience to a lot of Jewish people, but what are you gonna do? What you gonna do about it? That's a TikTok song. One of the negative sides of growing up in a Jewish community is the intergenerational trauma that exists in most Jewish families and communities because of the Holocaust. especially in the US and in Europe. And I narrowly avoided that trauma because that trauma is sort of emboldened by where you grow up and how you grow up, and having those survivors and very close relatives of survivors in communities is what sort of creates the intergenerational trauma. And because I had no community, I didn't get it. Now, and that's not to say that the Holocaust doesn't upset me, but it's quite a different, I think it's just a different experience, and I'm quite grateful that I don't experience that. And for a long time I felt guilty about it. It made me feel like I wasn't Jewish enough, which sounds ridiculous saying it to other people, but that is how I felt. I felt like I wasn't Jewish enough because I didn't have any intergenerational trauma. That's sort of my experience growing up interfaith. That is the end of this video. If you have any questions or videos that you would like to see next Vlognukkah, or videos just in general, please do let me know, and I'll be sure to get around to replying to you. If you want to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, my name is @AshleyFaith with an underscore on Twitter. And I hope you have a very, very, very happy Hanukkah, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next installment of Harvey's Vlognukkah. Thanks for being a faithful.
While we are playing, the candles are burning low. One for each night they shed, a sweet light to remind us of days long ago. One for each night they shed, a sweet light to remind us of days long ago.